Well, the important thing that is happening now in any case is that the oil price is falling. And this is mainly a market issue, but it's vital that Russia cannot develop its oil sector. The technology sanctions are already quite strong, and it's important to make sure that they are properly implemented. That is, that those who violate the sanctions get punished. And with regard to the financial sanctions, the US holds quite a bit of Russian official funds. And the US should confiscate that or seize it, whatever you call it, and deliver it to Ukraine. It's a $5 billion that is being held with New York Federal Reserve. And basically, the Obama administration already adopted the legislation for it. That is, the Congress adopted it under the Biden administration. So this is ready. It's just a simple executive order by the president that can deliver it. And it's very important that we don't see any easing of the US sanctions on Russia that was discussed. For example, taking off a major bank, Bank, from the sanctions.
And you mentioned the oil price there. I mean, is it possible that putting economic pressure on Russia could kind of be out of the hands of the US at this point if those oil prices just continue to drop as a result of market forces?
Yeah, you can say that sanctions are not really needed now. The oil price will fall in any case. And the Urals oil price, which is the relevant price for the Russians, it's already about $10 below the Brent oil price. So it's slightly under $50 per barrel now, while the Russian budget has counted on $70 per barrel. So this is a substantial blow to the Russian budget.
So what sort of impact could that have? And more widely, how resilient is the Russian economy to sanctions? And what's the state of the economy now in general?
The general word for the Russian economy since October has been stagflation. The growth rate, according to the central bank, is likely to be 1 to 2% this year. I would rather take it at the lower level. And the inflation is currently officially 10%, probably a few percent higher, because inflation expectations are 13%. And the interest rate of the central bank is 21%. You wonder, why is the central bank interest rate so high if inflation is only 10%? And the central bank hopes to get the inflation down to 4% at the end of next year, while the general expectation is that it will rise to 30%. Something there doesn't hang together. Inflation is a serious concern in Russia. And in terms of economic growth, things are going on. It's slow, but that's not a catastrophe. And the Russian technology is gradually being undermined by the Western sanctions. Well, they are not complete. They are quite severe for the Russian economy.
And what does that mean for the Kremlin long term? I mean, are they anywhere near a crisis point yet?
I wouldn't say so, but it means that they have less resources. They've already steered so much resources to the defense. 41% of the federal budget is now going this year officially to the military and to security. And Russia will have to cut its budget towards the end of this year, second half of this year, but by at least 2% of GDP, because we're running out of liquid reserves, or perhaps by 4% of GDP, which would be quite severe if the oil price stays this low, which is likely.
And alongside the potential political and I suppose military impact of being able to hit the May 9th parade. How would you assess the wider economic impact of Ukraine's ongoing long-range strikes into Russia, and how crucial could they be for Ukraine in putting pressure on Russia and possibly seizing some sort of victory in this conflict?
Well, I think that they should primarily be seen as military. What the Ukrainians have hit is lots of military factories and oil refineries and oil depots and ammunition depots. So you can say that the oil hits cost a bit, but not all that much, while the hits on the military targets have been quite effective. And the Ukrainians, unlike the Russians, are not going for civilian targets, which is a big difference. But the Russian economy is muddling through with near stagnation and high inflation. And if you look upon the military cost, Russia spends officially now 9% of GDP on the military and security. Ukraine spends about 50% of GDP, including all the Western assistance. And we hear the Russians complaining about the high military costs. We don't hear the Ukrainians complaining because they know that this is necessary for the nation's existence. And that is a big difference. The Ukrainians are tired and dispirited, but they don't give up because they know if they give up, they will be killed or they will have to flee their country. There's no possibility for the active Ukrainians to survive. And also, face it, Ukraine has probably 900,000 men and women under arms, and Russia has probably 650,000 soldiers involved in the war in Ukraine. So Ukraine has more soldiers than Russia, and it's the Russians who are attacking. Then you should be 3 times more. They are not. I heard recently about 60 to 80 Ukrainians who held a building in Pokrovsk with drones against 5,000 attacking Russian soldiers, who are then taking out one after the other in a terrible meat grinder.
And so, where does that leave Russia's war economy? I mean, when you last spoke to this program, you mentioned that Russia probably wouldn't be able to take the conflict on much longer than the end of 2025. Has anything that's changed since then, politically or militarily, changed your assessment on that?
Yeah, the fundamental thing here is not economic but political. That is when the Russian people say enough is enough. For the war in Afghanistan, it took 1 decade, but only 15,000 Soviet soldiers killed. And the Soviet Union then had twice as many people as Russia has today. What we are talking about in Russia today is a loss of 160 to 200,000 soldiers killed and something like 600,000 injured soldiers. These are enormous losses. And the question is, when will this ache through? And this is more a psychological and political question than an economic question. To me, it's quite incomprehensible that Russia is prepared to take so much. You hear the interviews that are being undertaken in Russia. It says that people increasingly want peace, but they want Russia to win. There will be no victory for Russia. What we're seeing is that the front has basically been standing still for the last year in spite of massive Russian resources being wasted. And you just wonder, for how long will the Russian people tolerate this madness? We know that the Russians can tolerate a lot, but why?
And is there anything that could change then? this year that could change that outcome? I mean, before the visits had ended to the Kremlin, Steve Witkoff had suggested the US could reopen trade with Russia, for example, or lift some sanctions. Is that possible given the wider international sanctions if the US was going to do this unilaterally? And I suppose at this point, is any of that kind of dead in the water after the announcement a few days ago?
Exactly. This is the big thing that seems to have changed, although we don't have it clearly confirmed from the White House, and probably won't have. So it seems that the White House now prefers to forget about this war, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said a couple of times, if we don't get a result soon enough, then we will leave. And of course, it's an advantage for his position in Washington if Witkoff turns out not to have managed anything. And I would presume that Rubio would not like to lift the sanctions. He has previously been a hardliner on Russia, and I don't think that he has fully forgotten his own old positions. So to me, it looks as if Witkoff, in spite of being so close to President Trump, has really blown it in this very unbalanced negotiations with Russia. And therefore, it looks as if his agenda, which you just mentioned, is the sanction and stimulate the US investment in Russia, are gone. And anyhow, Europe would not accept easing the sanctions, and very few Americans, if any, would be prepared to undertake investments in Russia. So from my point of view, this seems to be the best we could have hoped for, because unfortunately the ceasefire negotiations from the beginning were at best meaningless, less, but probably harmful.
And to finish, Anders, Wednesday will mark 25 years since Putin's official inauguration as president of Russia. How would you judge his impact on Russia as an economic power, and for that matter, Russia's impact on Europe and the world in the last few decades?
Yeah, you can say that the first two terms of Putin until 2008 was a stunning economic success, 7% growth each year. But why did it happen? For three reasons, I would say. Because of the market economic reforms in the 1990s that finally succeeded. The second point was the oil and commodity boom. And the third, that Russia then had lots of free resources. Since 2008, the Russian economy has barely grown at 1% a year on average. And Russia's GDP is only $2 trillion less than the Italian economy. And it is not going to grow anytime soon. And structurally, it has become backward in recent years when Putin's cronies and the state are taking over ever more of previously successful new enterprises. So economically, it started off very nicely, but not because of Putin. He arrived at a late table, and now Putin has eaten up all the good resources, and he does not seem to be able to deliver anything else apart from war.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on the war in Ukraine, you can sign up for membership at the link below or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to the latest news and analysis on Times Radio or read it on thetimes.com. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.